Oh, we're live.
We're live.
Hey, welcome to Nonfiction Book Club. I'm Deboki. I guess I'm the host this time. What do? I do science writing. I write about science usually, but also talk about books on YouTube, like here for Nonfiction Book Club.
Hello, I'm Nicole Sweeney. What do I do?
What don't you do?
Too
You
much
fly
time
planes.
on the internet. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I do lots of things. And now I'm here talking to Deboki about books. That's the other thing. Monthly-ish, we get together and talk about books. I did recently upload a video to my YouTube channel, and even as I was doing it, I was like, this is weird because this is just a place where I do a live stream every other month.
Yeah.
But here, a video.
I won't lie, like the only child in me is like very, very flattered that like your channel exists partly for us to be able to have this conversation.
Yep. Yes. You are really part of the primary purpose of my YouTube channel at this point. Everything my YouTube channel needs, it gets from you, Deboki.
Oh, thank you. The ultimate fandom. Yeah, we're going to talk about everything I need I get from you, how fangirls created the internet as we know it by Caitlin Tiffany. Sorry, I'm on a new computer and figuring out where things are, but this is where the webcam is. So yeah, it's about fandom. It's about the internet. It's a lot about One Direction and the author's relationship to it, but also like sort of an examination of the fandom overall. I will apologize in advance for like how often I think I'm going to bring up Taylor Swift in this conversation, because like that is my like biggest fandom reference. But this book is like very, very specifically about One Direction. So yeah.
That's it.
That is,
you did it. That's
do you?
What it is.
So one of the things that I was like very curious about before we started, I guess, it was like, did you know, like, what is your relationship to the One Direction fandom?
Non-existent. She talks a little bit about how like if you're extremely online and if you're very on Twitter and stuff, that like the things that you'll absorb, and that's pretty much the extent of it. Like there's a handful of things that she talks about that are like, I'm like, yeah, I sort of had like an outskirts awareness of a thing happening, from like this One Direction, I don't know, I was very much on Tumblr during the height of the the time period that she's describing, so a lot of like adjacent references, but I know basically nothing about One Direction beyond what one absorbs by being extremely online.
Yeah, it was super interesting to me to see all of this stuff where I was like, oh, I'm obviously like know about like Larry, like that's like hard to escape, but like some of the other stuff I was like, oh, I did not know about the specifics of this conspiracy theory about like their record company, like and like trying to hold back their music. All of that stuff was so new to me, and so it was very fascinating to be like, oh, this was happening in these spaces. And I just missed it.
Completely missed all of this happening. So yeah.
And we like, and I think like after we had like said that we were going to do this book, there were some people talking in the Discord about being surprised by how One Direction focused it is. And so we were talking a little bit about whether or not we were excited for that, or like sort of like, I guess we hadn't started reading it yet, but like I was sort of excited for that because I like a very deep dive specific kind of like entrance into the analysis. So I'm curious how you felt about that.
We talked also to kind of rehash some of the Discord conversation, but I was excited, also extremely not surprised. Like that's very much like the way that you structure like writing about fan communities. It's like it's not particularly useful to paint with too broad a brush, like to talk about them without getting into a lot of the like very specifics of like this happened and this happened and this happened, like in detailing specific fan communities, because otherwise like it's harder to see what the broader connections and threads are if you're just like, well, here's one example of a thing that like fan communities do or did, or I don't know, so that didn't surprise me at all. I also was very excited about it. So yeah.
Yeah, you did like fandom community researchy
Yes.
things.
Yes, that was like a big part of what I did in grad school. Like technically my degree
Mhm.
is in communications, but like basically what I did was researching online fan communities. Actually, it was exciting because in the back of the book, like at the
Yeah.
acknowledgement, she has a list of books that are like, I didn't cite these books, but they were like important to me, like to my research
Mhm.
or whatever. And I'm like, I have half of these books on my shelf.
Uh,
So like, yep, this is unsurprising to me that these
yeah.
were your core citations and references. There is something that's really interesting, something that I have thought about a lot in the years since grad school that I was thinking about a lot while reading this. Uh, there's always like a big tension around the way in which you want to talk about, like the way in which many people want to discuss the like transformative and empowered nature of fan communities, and that tension butting up against a group that exists for like capitalistic profit for not them,
Mhm.
for somebody else. And so like that sort of tension and dynamic, I think about it all the time, partially because it was something that I didn't get, like I evaded it as much as possible in my own writing. Like I was like, this
Yeah.
is really thorny and I don't really want to think about it. And so I danced around it
Mhm.
a lot. And it was something that my thesis advisor was constantly trying to like, it's like the focal point of his notes and feedback were often around that, around like, you are not
Yeah.
interrogating, you are not doing enough to interrogate the like the exploitative nature
Yeah.
of these relationships, I guess. um
Yeah.
and it's something that like always jumps out at me in how I am reading different things, because
Mhm.
it's like I feel like that's a line that people writing about fan communities tend to sort of pick one side or the other. Like there's
Yeah.
you end up falling into one camp or the other. I feel like this was interesting to me because you could feel her wrestling with it in a
Mhm.
lot of the say, like I don't know, in a lot of ways that I'm like, yep, deeply relatable. I wanted her to come to more conclusions for my own sake. She did not.
Yeah.
She mostly expressed a lot of my own like anxieties and tensions. I would say she
Yeah.
doesn't express it quite enough for my liking either. But like
Uh-huh.
I want to qualify that with like I'm coming at this from like that's like a me thing, you know what I mean? Like when I say
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
I wanted her to get into it more, and I'm talking to her, and I'm also talking to like my past self when I say I wanted
Mhm.
her to get into this. I wanted her to like unpack that bit of it more. That like
Yeah, yeah,
for
I think
all of
that's super interesting because it's like I feel like what this book ended up feeling a lot like for me was like a self-reflective exercise on like
yeah.
fandom where it's like I can't relate to like one direction, but I think about this a lot like now in Taylor Swift context, but like also like in the past like with Harry Potter and stuff like that where it's like yeah, like just and I guess also just in general, I think about it all the time with internet communities because that's like the other thing that this book is about. It is not just fandom, it is
Right.
fandom in its relationship to internet communities. And I have so many ambivalent feelings about communities now these days that like I have gotten worse. Or like I used to love it and like totally seek out like these communities and partly just I think getting older and getting cranky, but also just the nature of the communities online have evolved and changed in a way that are
Mhm.
really uncomfortable to me. And yeah, I end up with a lot of ambivalence where I feel like my feelings are so based on like, or like the feelings that I'm willing to articulate are based on what the feelings of the person I'm talking to or responding to are. So like someone who's
Ooh.
like super critical of fandom, I'm like, no, no, fandom is so good. It's great. Like
Yeah,
I love
yeah,
it.
yeah.
But someone who's like, not who doesn't like who's super defensive of fandom and doesn't like want to engage with the criticisms. I'm like, no, fandom is awful, or
Yes.
like internet communities are the end of civilization. Like I feel like I and I think that's like fair. Like I think I'm like in the middle in that way, but I also wish I could like I think like the ambivalence is like starting to get frustrating to me too. Like I want to end up like on one place or the other and I'm like trying to learn to let go of that and it's so hard.
Yes. Yes, 100%. That's like so much a part of like that to me is there's like two core dichotomies in like the way that I think about like fans, you know, like I don't know, fan studies sort of is like scholarship
Mhm.
around that. And like this like community, like empowered community, whatever. There's like, that's like fans are their own like powerful force. And then like, okay, but you're actually just like doing a lot of free labor for like somebody else's profit, and all of this is exploitation, and like whatever.
Yeah.
There's like those sort of camps, and I tend to like mentally put everything into like one of those two buckets. The other big one, and I don't think anything published in the last 20 years actually really, this dichotomy is like old. It's more of like a 90s, early aughts writing thing. But the other dichotomy is like, are you in it, or are you a dispassionate observer? I don't think there is not a ton of like, there's a lot less of like dispassionate observer writing about fan communities, which I also think is really, really interesting, as like a separate kind of thread. But anyway, this question of like, how much are we interrogating and unpacking like the degree to which any empowerment is also like actually bolstering something else. I don't know, like it's like so much a part of how I think about like fan communities, but also online communities, and also like what do those things do to our sense of like physical community. I don't know, a lot of existential dread for the first 10 minutes of the live stream, but here we are.
We're already there. So I mean, like, I know you said you like kind of avoided writing about it in your thesis. And I'm sorry, I feel like I'm going into interviewer mode, but it's because I'm like very curious about it since you did spend time researching it. Like what would it like, what would the questions that you're asking in that context look like? Or like what kind of things would you be trying to unpack more specifically? Or like maybe in the book, like was there something specific that like stood out in that regard? Because I feel like I hear that and I understand what it means, but I don't like fully grasp it.
Yeah, so like I think that, you know, there's a lot of discussion of what this fandom and what this community means for the individuals that are in it, and like how beneficial it is to them. But like I think that you can't, those sort of like individualistic gains are like, there's that piece of it, but then it's often not also contending with the fact that all of those benefits are in service of like advancing this like the career of this band, or like what I don't know, like so like the question is like if we're framing these groups as these really powerful forces, like to what end? Like this fan community is a very powerful force. What is like the achievement at the end of that? Like greater success for One Direction? And like I don't know. I feel weird even saying all of this too, because the tension that I'm describing, like I think that she's getting into that. Like I don't think that anything I'm saying is stuff that feels at odds with what Caitlin Tiffany is saying here. But I think that like it is the core thing for me is that any discussion of online fan communities that doesn't include some degree of critique of capitalism at the same time is like hollow to me, or is not hollow, but is only telling part of the story. And it is like, it feels like you're intentionally telling part of the story to make it like shinier and better, to make it be like, oh, look at how great this thing is. And I don't know. And like, that's she mentions like Adorno at some point in there. He's like often I think she mentions that I like highlighted actually specifically because she mentions him as like being often sort of like misquoted, miscited, and it's like because like the core thing there, like his contempt for popular music basically was like you are people being placated from very like large structural inequities because music is fun. And but also, I don't know, sometimes I just want to listen to the fun music and not think about my powerlessness. Thanks.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because I feel like there's such a weird tension around like within fandom too, like the thing that all like the times when I have the most problems with fandom are when I feel like fandom is like being very entitled about like the artist, about what the artist owes them. But there is like a weird tension around that I feel like might be, I don't know, the way that I'm interpreting this, that it like does feel like built on this like fundamental idea we have that everything is an exchange, that like that if I'm doing this for you, you should be doing this for me. And with like fandom, it just keeps going. This like inherently just like it keeps going back and forth. Like it can't not, because the idea is that you're like in conversation with an artist and with their work, and it's all transactional, or it feels like it's like increasingly transactional.
Which, and like that's the thing, is like people wanting like, you know, bids for connection. Like the whole point, the reason that like the reason to avoid the like hyper fixation on the like the capitalism of it all is basically that like people want these, like there's a bid for connection in it. There's a like, I don't want to think about every experience that I have as being purely transactional. And so like I want to have this big, you know, like I want to think about how this is connecting me to other people. And like it can be both. Like both things can be true, that this is a way, the thing that is connecting you to other people, and also that like the time and energy you are spending to connect to these people is you know, in service of some other end that is maybe less wholesome.
Yeah. And I feel like it comes up all the time with Taylor Swift in terms of like people, like the relationship of her with fans, in terms of like how much is like people's willingness, my willingness to pay a shit ton of money and put a lot of time into like getting tour tickets or like merch. Like I have a stupid amount of Taylor Swift merch, and like I like know better than to expect that to like really mean anything except like dollar signs to Taylor Swift, especially because the merch is not great. But like I'm mostly talking shit about myself at this point because I still bought it. But yeah, like there's such a weird like the idea of the re-recordings. Like one of the things that I feel like is funny is like seeing it from the fan side versus seeing it from like non-fan side, where like, yeah, like fans do treat it entirely as if it's being done like in service of like this like masters like kind of thing, and also for the fans. And then like on the flip side, I'll see people being like, this is like all just for money. And part of me is like, yeah, of course it is. Like I don't know, like yeah, like I don't know, like I don't like I think sometimes that's for me where I kind of get stuck in the capitalist kind of like discourse, because I'm like, yeah, I don't know, like that is my assumption for like a pop artist, that it is
there's like, a profit, there's a significant profit motive here. Like this is, Taylor Swift is a brand. Like in addition to being a person, she is also significantly a brand. And so I like that is all, that's definitely very like true. And I think that sometimes that like the need for people to be like, no, this is all part of our big like wholesome community thing. I don't know, man. No, a lot of this is truly just for profit. I don't know what to tell you. That is what's happening. I'm also like having a good time, so whatever, I guess.
There's something else, this is like unrelated, but it's just something I kept thinking about throughout this book, and it was something that I was like wondering in terms of like how like maybe this is like super rooted in the author's like personal experience with Wendy, because she's like talking about it as something that like helped her at a time where she was super lonely. But one of the things that I kept noticing is that when she would talk about like individual people's like entrances into Wendy fandom, I think almost all of them, except maybe like a few chaotic ones towards the end, like I think the pregnant Harry Styles one felt like it was like just very chaos induced, which I loved. But all the rest of them were very much the idea I kept coming across, like I kept thinking of, was like void filling, like that the purpose of fandom was to fill a void. And it's something that I understand, and I feel like it also to me comes off across as like defensive about fandom, about trying to show it that it has a purpose. But there was something also sort of weird to me about that, because I kept wondering, is there like a way to talk about the fandom and the purpose of fandom that's not just about like coming from a place of sadness? Like can it just come from like a place of joy?
I think that tension, that is something that like that you comes up more in like academic like whatever sort of scholarly writing about it. Like I think it is particularly bound to come up. I said that the like the other binary no longer, like it was like a thing of, sort of thing of the past, like 90s early aughts type thing, but I think that it has been replaced with like that, like the binary, like the there's less dispassionate observers writing about fan communities, but like there's in its place is sort of this like is that sort of tension sort of wrangling with like, no, this is it's filling the loneliness in people's souls. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's something like weird because like I feel like this comes up in romance novel discourse too, like this image of like a sad woman who's reading romance novels to like fulfill something. And like I get it, and like I like it also, I don't want to like undermine like that is like probably people's experiences as well, but there's just something about that feels so like, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm like increasingly in this place where it just feels like talking about women's interests. It feels like you're just going to always end up in a place where it's dissatisfying, because it's like you're always going to butt up against like a feeling of defensiveness, a need to like justify, like, yeah.
She talks about that like late. It's related to something that she talks about late in the book, that like there's the inclination to homogenize a like fan communities, that is just like when you are talking about something that is that popular as One Direction, like your sort of like broad strokes, like it is statistically impossible that like you're not going to have like all possible demographics encompassed somewhere in that fandom, just because like I don't know, it's just like it's fucking popular. There's a lot of people, and so I'm pretty sure that it was something that I tabbed. That's why I was looking, like scanning for it now. But
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, I thought that was interesting as well.
Yeah, I feel like
here it is. This is the thing. I like this story because it reminds me that all combinations of identity are equally unlikely, and we can only be experts in our own. Which, like, I don't know. Yeah. True. Good point.
Yeah. It's interesting, like going back through my notes, because I didn't even realize that I wrote ambivalence in my notes, and like there it is. I wrote it yesterday, and I feel like I already forgot that. Yeah. Oh yeah. So this was the thing I was thinking about, because a lot of the stuff in this book seems so specific to 1D, but like also about fandom in general. But it's like very much built around the fact that these are real people. Like you can't talk about the like Larrys without it like being about the fact that these are about real people. And like that made me think about the fact that like now at this point, a lot of my fandom touchstones are like real people kind of things. Like there are parallels to so many of these chapters that are the Taylor Swift version of this.
Yes.
Like instead of Larry, it's like Gaylor. Like all of these things have their own version. But what was I? Oh, is there like what are the differences in the dynamics? And I'm just like, I don't have an answer, but like what are the differences then for fandoms that are not built around real people, or do they inevitably become built around real people? Because like something like Harry Potter, you're still drawn to the actors, or like Supernatural, definitely there is like a part of that fandom that is heavily about the actors in the show. Like, are we inevitably with any fandom built online gonna make it about people? Because like especially with the connection of like the internet, like that is also a big part of like this book too, and like how it's examining it. There's like the inherent part of like interacting with actors and writers and all of this stuff that like makes it weird.
Yeah. I feel like fandom built around something that is purely fictional it has much more space to remain tied to things that are purely fictional. And like there's a level of sort of affinity building for actors that's like tied up in that, of like, oh, I love this thing that you were in, and so I'm also sort of like low-key rooting for you. That's true, sure. But like the stars of all my favorite TV shows, whenever they're in something else, I'm like, ooh, that person, I love that person. And like that's a thing. But I feel like there's something distinct and different. The thing that really, like talking about the Larrys and in turn like the like Gaylor, whatever, all of that, that the thing with real people that specifically makes me so uncomfortable and is like fundamentally impossible when you're dealing with fiction is the conspiracy theory stuff that it turns out late last, like I'm relatively new to sort of Taylor Swift like fandom spaces, and so like last fall maybe, I guess I've found my way pure, just scrolling wholly unintentionally, getting a lot there's a period of like a couple months where I was getting served a ton of like deep cut Gaylor conspiracy theory stuff. And it took me a while. I was like watching it. And then finally I just like, I started whenever it came up, like I was like muting and blocking a lot of the people who post it because I got to this place where it was like, all of this makes me so viscerally uncomfortable, not because we're talking about a real like I don't even like I actually don't give a shit about like the Taylor Swift, like how this affects Taylor Swift. Like I think any hand wringing about how this affects Taylor Swift is like totally fucking stupid to me. There's no to me, really truly the biggest problem that I have with the entire conspiracy theory is that Taylor Swift is too rich and powerful for it to matter. Like she's like there's no like what is her motivation for being closet? Like none of that tracks, none of that fucking makes any sense to me. I also just like I generally don't feel none of this is actually going to have any consequences for her whatsoever, except the people are still talking about her, and that has sort of a net win. So like both sides of the hand wringing about like, oh, think about how this is affecting Taylor Swift, to me is like irrelevant. Don't care. Your opinion is so whatever to me. The thing that I found unsettling about it, and it nope, not going to kick that hornet's nest. There's a handful of other related things that I feel like where I see people showing their like the deep conspiracy theory thinking that like is like really, really concerning to me. And the more of these videos I watched, the more that I realized that it was like, there is literally nothing anyone can say or do that can convince these people otherwise. Like, like there's no, like, every woman that Taylor Swift has been romantically linked to, they could all come out and put out like a statement saying, nope, this has never happened. She could say, nope, this has never happened. And like this, she talks about that in the book with the Larrys, like that. And that to me is like, in like a bigger picture cultural sense, very, very concerning to me. This like the attachment to like truth being so up for debate in this way. I don't know, everything about it, like it just made me so fucking uncomfortable for reasons that have nothing to do with Taylor Swift or that fandom, and just like everything to do with, I don't know, like what it says about society in a big picture way, that there are people who are spending so much of their time and energy like deeply committed to this conspiracy theory that's like a that that this is happening. Like I don't know.
I do like object to it on like speculating about people to this extent is like I feel like bad for the person who's getting speculated about, because I just don't like it. Like I just like, as a fundamental boundary, I just like I feel like you just like shouldn't talk about people like in this way to this degree. Like there's just something that obsessive about a specific thing that like I just find really like ugh. But also
really
like,
quickly I want to say that I totally get what you're saying. There's like a related thread to that though, that contrary to everything else I just said, that every time I would see it I would be like, oh, but you're also like, this is part of the thing, is the way there's a way in which specifically straight people who reject the like the Gaylor theories will talk about there is a specific tone to straight people talking about, well, you shouldn't out people, that is like, oh, I'm suspicious of you. Like I'm wary. I'm like, I don't trust you because there's a way in which you're talking about this that is like, yeah, I as a straight person, let me tell you all about how dangerous it is to be, I don't know, like there's just something there that is like, I don't know.
I mean, I think that's like one of the things that's hard, because she talks about how like that becomes like like not that you're doing this, but like other people will use that thing too to also be like set up basically battlefields that like you just cannot, like there's just no coming back from that. There was also this moment that I was so fascinated by, like the whole conspiracy theory section was fascinating to me inherently, just because it like tracks so much with how like when people talk about sort of like QAnon and like how like you just cannot logic someone out of QAnon, like that, like there was so much, like the part where she was like I think there was a fan who like was surprised when like Tomlinson called bullshit on Larry. Literally, she was shocked and disturbed that nothing changed in the Larry world. Instead of diminishing, they became more defiant, she said. Like that was like, yeah, like that is the ultimate, like where you cannot like engage with, like you can't argue someone out of that, because that becomes more fodder for their like way of thinking. And then there's this other part that was so I don't know if I'm definitely have it flagged.
And it's so disturbing too to see that, like that you can't argue, where it's like it's easier for people to be like, oh, we're just talking about like pop stars, so it's like not, but it's like look around. Look around.
So there's this part where Tiffany's talking about Larry suffered from outside scrutiny and from internal policing, but they've made conspiracy thinking easy for the next group of fans. There is no one fandom community to deal with now because of the way Babygate ripped it in half. And over the years, the Babygate taboo has eroded, particularly in places like TikTok, where attention metrics reward absurdity. Where like I like hadn't thought about how like one conspiracy theory kind of like sets up a community for like more going forward, just because you're sort of like inherently divided and like you just cannot fight kind of like in that way anymore, or like there's no community kind of way to handle it.
Well, like they're and like related to that, like that is why I also find it so like, it's like I take issue with anybody saying, oh, it's not that deep, these are just like theories about pop stars or whatever. Like it's not that, it's totally fine, and like it shouldn't, I shouldn't be concerned about people being conspiracy theorists about pop stars, when it's like, no, they're once you have demonstrated sort of an extreme susceptibility to conspiracy thinking, and again, like I want to say, it was like a couple months of watching these Gaylor videos and being like, oh, you got it, like really interesting. And then like I don't know what like my tipping point moment was, but I did just have this moment where it was like, this is like batshit, like this is deeply unhinged, and it's like it's so interesting too, because there's not really a clear line between, like, I think there's a lot of like what are like queer readings of these songs, like that to me does feel genuinely harmless. You're not like implying anything, you're not suggesting that there's some vast conspiracy theory, you're just saying, hey, here are like ways to interpret this, that is that, and like that, cool, love that, that's great, like that's you know, different people finding different meaning in a thing, and like the journey from there to, I believe that there's a vast conspiracy keeping one of the richest women alive from being honest about her sexuality. Like I just I don't know. How do we get from here to here? I'm not sure. Like I don't know where the line is a lot between those two things, but somewhere in there we cross over, and it gets really uncomfy.
Yeah, there was that like fascinating period when like Taylor broke up with Joe, and like the fight within the fandom about whether or not that was real, because like people were basically waiting for like Taylor Swift to like come out and like I don't know, like announce it in public statement. And like people like had to explain, like, if it is in People magazine, like and like I remember seeing like people on TikTok be like, no, your media literacy is bad. People's like a gossip magazine, like it's not real if it's there, and like having to explain like that's not like what like I'm not the one who sucks at media literacy. Like I have watched, like I have engaged with gossip for enough time to like know the difference, at least to a reasonable degree, of like what is like bullshit and like what is real. And like if you're gonna trust like De Moi over People magazine, like that is like the issue with media literacy to me.
Yes.
But yeah, it felt like at least that got, I don't know, people figured it out eventually, but
like
it's just so
that's
weird.
the thing too. It's like the fixation on like individual, yeah, I don't know, whether it's like it's not that when it's not about like, oh, this song
Yeah.
that came out or whatever, it's like what, I don't know, the
Yeah.
investigation, to go back to your point before about like real people, like how do you what, like where is the line between fictional, people having just discourse about fictional things versus getting overly invested in real people. And I don't know, like with
Yeah, there's
obviously with
something.
a musician, with an incredibly
Yeah.
like famously autobiographical musician, like that line
Yeah.
is gets murky, like it's never
Yeah.
clear. uh
Yeah.
there's never a clear delineation, but I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, she had like a line in the book about like we're like in an age where I think we can like read what's that, like we can read, we're reading people, or like we're reading them like as characters or something, like,
Yes.
and not just like reading their work. And I was like, yeah, I feel very called out right now, because that is like how I think of like my engagement with Taylor Swift music, like
Uh-huh.
where I feel like I like part of the reason why I like Reputation so much is because of the way that I read it against Taylor
Mm.
Swift's arc. And
Uh-huh.
same with like Midnights. Like I have a specific reading of Midnights that isn't necessarily, I think, how like I think a lot of people now especially read Midnights as a breakup album, and I don't read it as a breakup album at all. Like it's not like the way that I'm like interested in it. So like it's just like it's a reading, right? Like that's what
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean. Is
yeah.
not to say that my
Yeah.
interpretation is like the interpretation. It's just like I definitely have a version of Taylor Swift in my head that is a character that I read against, that
Uh-huh.
has, and then like importantly for me, nothing to do with the real Taylor Swift,
Yeah.
except that she makes it, right? Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
to her,
yeah.
like she has like a relationship to it as the creator. My relationship as the consumer is like about a character and not like actual Taylor Swift, because I don't know her. Like I
Yes.
couldn't
Yes.
possibly like know
Yes.
what it actually means.
And to go back to like my point about like I don't care about the like how Taylor Swift feels about people making all like that is sort of what I mean, is that like
Mhm.
that is the project that she's engaging in here, right? Is
Right.
like
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
I don't
she's
know.
created a character too, like that
Right.
that is like a part of the
She's an
character she's
active and intentional
constructed.
participant in that dynamic. So like that's part of why I'm like whatever. Um
Yeah. Yeah, it's
I
so
don't know.
weird. It's so weird to think about, like, how were people famous before the internet?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
what did that look like for them to, like, be able, because, like, obviously, like, a lot of fame and celebrity gossip has revolved around, like, people projecting onto famous people. Like,
Hmm.
I feel like that was part of the studio system, was, like, constructing these images for actors and actresses that they could
Hmm.
sell to magazines to, like, then sell their movies. But,
Hmm.
like, yeah, like, just, like, what is the difference in the relationship to fame in that kind of system versus, like, now where, like also, like, we're all constructing identities online, like, we are all constructing
Yes.
characters, but we're just doing it to such different degrees, like, the extent to which, like, we're a character to other people is different from the extent to which, like, Taylor Swift is, and I
That's
don't,
the thing
like
that you saying that, like, that to me is the big thing that I would say, like, in understand, like, what is the difference for like for famous people? I don't know, but like I think it's significant to note that people are performing their affinities now also
Mhm,
in a way that like they never used to be. Like I think that this is also part of why you get why, again, to go back to something before, but like a big part of why you get a lot of the weird defensiveness in
mhm,
of like from fans is that like so much of being a person online involves a lot of that. Like part of
mhm.
the stock avatar that I'm presenting to the world is fan of this thing. And so
Mhm.
like if you're criticizing this thing, then you're criticizing me, and like I don't know, like
Yeah.
in like that those sorts of weird loops. And I think that whatever the difference is, I think that like that's like heightening it, right? Like there's like it's intensified by the way in which, I don't know, like not that like the that having a sense of like self tied up in being a fan of a thing is inherently new to the internet, but I
Mhm.
do think that there's a lot more active construction of that, like the threshold for being a person who is building your identity around being a fan is
Yeah.
lower than it used to be because
Yeah.
of social media.
Yeah. I guess the other, like, to bring it back to like what we were talking about in the beginning, because I was thinking about the capitalist thing so much in terms of like how like I enabled Taylor Swift to live her like capitalist fantasy, like capitalist queen, thanks to me, her peon.
Uh-huh.
But also like the other aspect of it too, and like I'm thinking about it now because of Threads, but it's like social media platforms
Yeah.
are like getting so like Tumblr exists in part because of fandom. Like
Yes.
Twitter is like a big part of this book. Tumblr is a big part of this book. I don't think she gets into Reddit, but like Reddit is a big part of like a lot of people's fandom experiences too. Like
Mhm.
there's so much. I would love to like see a way of like understanding this, not necessarily through like the lens of the fandom. Like I would love to see a version of this book that is like sort of the like more geared around the social, like the platforms and like the
Yeah.
way that they interact with fandom.
That to me is definitely to also on like the sort of capitalist deconstruction. Like that to me is definitely the much more interesting thing. Like I don't like
Mm-hmm.
it sort of deconstructing what the dynamic is for like a single pop star is very like whack-a-mole. Like I don't know, like one
Yeah, yeah.
like that's whatever. Like I don't know if you unpack it for one person, like that's not hugely significant to me, but like the whole platform is built around it, that is. There's
Mm-hmm.
a really interesting, oh gosh, who wrote this? There's a one of the few ways that I did engage with this was actually platform centric.
Mm-hmm.
It's a book about, maybe it was just a journal article about television without pity, and like that
Oh,
relationship specifically, or like that as a platform, and then sort of like fan communities, and this like the idea of essentially free labor generating a ton of revenue for a platform, like that, sort of
yeah.
unpacking that and like getting into I was never on this website, so I only know about it from the context of like
I used to read
reading about
recaps on there
it.
all the time. Yeah.
So, and also like having done something that is like born out of, you know, like I also like I like did a lot of like recapping, and like that was a thing,
Yeah.
but without having ever personally engaged directly with television without pity. So
Yeah.
I'm not, I don't actually have the fullest understanding of like how this discussion was framed, but anyway, like the, I don't know, like that dynamic of platforms and like people's labor and like those systems and how they work. um I don't have an end to this thought.
Yeah. No, I mean, because I think it's just like one of those weird things. Because like there's some like because you're sort of saying like there's like the whack-a-mole of thinking about it in the context of the artist itself, where to a certain extent I'm sort of like, well, like, but I gotta talk about it. Like
Yeah,
I gotta
yeah.
do something. Like part of like and like I don't like I think part of art just like in general is like you have like a conversation of some
Yeah,
form with it. Like it
yeah.
doesn't have to be a very long one, but part of fandom is like extending that conversation and having it with other people, whether
Hmm,
that's through
hmm.
fanfic, fan art, whatever, like all of that stuff. And like when you see like people making this like incredible fan art, like yeah, like it's in service of the artist, but it's also just like I don't know, there's something just so innately cool about some of the like talents that people are bringing to it where you're like,
Yeah,
okay, like you sublimated it through the specific artist, but that's super cool.
yeah.
I forget where I was going to go with this. But I think there's like the sort of thing of like I don't know really what to do with that because it's like at the end of the day I still got to talk about it. But like when you think about it like in terms of like Reddit like now having all of this like tension with its users over like how it's changing its platform and like and
Hmm,
not like making their API available, like Tumblr's had like this issue all the time like and I think has gotten to its own steady state
hmm.
where and like this happens outside of fandom too, like it's about fundamentally internet communities and it does go back to entitlement sometimes, but also like to the fact that also these companies have built something that we're using and like often for free, so like what does that mean? I don't know.
Yes.
Um like who's the one in control? Like it was interesting that this book ended like with that question around like power because it
Yeah.
is and she's like really documenting it partly through the lens of Black Lives Matter, which was
Uh-huh.
one interesting way to go about it because I really appreciated the way that she talked about it like as something that is so I don't know, like inherently paradoxical because it feels so good. Like it feels like we're being saved by these young like
Yes.
fans, but like actually a lot of these fans are not necessarily really being driven by like politics or like necessarily like well, like, again, like, it's hard to paint it with a broad brush because, like,
Mm-hmm.
it is like fandom as a mass versus like fandoms, like fans as individuals. But like, we can't just like cling to like a really easy narrative of like fans are going to save us. They're going to like, it's really more about the fact that they know specifically how to do this thing, of they know how to
Mm-hmm.
like crash phone lines. They know how to do
Right.
these things. So like, what does that power look like? Like, I have no idea. I don't know. Because that was the thing. That was like the thing that I kept thinking throughout this book is like one of the things that is uncomfortable. Like it's one like like we're talking about like a lot of the fandom we're talking about is like people like just talking about theories online. But there is the next level of like people actively harassing people, like or
Yeah.
people doing things that are like crossing an actual like physical boundary.
Yes.
And there's some cases where you're like, crash that phone line, do it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
great. But I don't know. There are just so many moments where I just kept thinking like, just, that was like the extent of my response to the thing that
Just
I was
like
reading.
screaming in my head. Yep. That was a core takeaway. A core takeaway to a lot of this book.
Yep. Yeah, I was thinking about that also a lot with the belonging chapter, because I think that's the one where she's talking about like sort of the aspect of like the way that the band members and their choices about what they're going to speak on like feel meaningful. And like one of the things at the end she says is like, to hope that Niall Horan deeply cares about my rights is to hope that the other men I love do. And that was a thing where I was like, I'm glad that she wrote that, but I also feel like that feels like a very like that's a thing that I notice like in a lot of spaces that like I think is fraught. Like I think it's like really hard. Like I totally understand it because I do think that it's real. I think like we want people to care in a way that like sometimes we're hoping that these like famous people who we've like invested a lot in emotionally or whatever do too. But like Niall Horan caring, it doesn't like really mean anything about the men in your life caring. And like you can't really substitute actual personal relationships or personal accountability or like a personal conversation about these things with the actual like celebrity who you don't directly engage with.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, sorry, the reason why I was thinking about this is like, this isn't fandom, but like one of my bad hobbies is like reading snark Reddits about bloggers and like reading then like the people snarking on the people snarking about bloggers. And so like, this is like a thing that comes up in terms of like people wanting influencers to speak out on a lot of things, but then you like go into the user's profile and they'll talk about like their partner who also like are their family members who have whatever super racist beliefs and stuff. And so there's this like weird dissonance between like wanting influencers to do something that you necessarily aren't willing to do yourself in your personal life, which is like actually a very relatable thing I think to a lot of people. Like I think that's a normal human impulse, even if it's like one that hopefully like we would all be able to like learn to be able to like engage in that conflict. Like just this desire to have the people that we see like at this distance reflect our values maybe more than the people than we actually engage with in person.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, it's that also feels like related to the question of how much of our like people's own identities are being wrapped up in this question of like, and interestingly, I think that there is a disconnect, that like there's a level of separation that you can have, especially if you're talking about like your immediate family members, where like I didn't fucking choose these people, so it's like my sense of self isn't necessarily dictated by like, whereas I'm saying I'm choosing to be like, to build a sense of self around being a fan of this person, and so like their values, I want their values to project and reflect my values in a way that like like I get it, but also it is really interesting that like I think that it is so much easier for people to see how a celebrity's values should be, that somebody that they are a fan of, like their values should reflect their values, without looking around them and seeing that like, okay, but who you choose to associate yourself with is actually infinitely more telling of what your values are than whether or not some celebrity that you're a fan of is mirroring your values back to you.
Yeah. That is helpful, because I was like trying to kind of like figure out what it is that was like what it is that's like being expressed by that, because it's like, yeah, I don't know, because I understand it, because there are times where I'm like, I love it. Like if Taylor Swift was like maybe my environmentalist queen a little bit.
Yeah,
Maybe flew a private jet a little bit less.
Just cool it a little and
yeah. But yeah. And so like, and also like that, because like you go down the rabbit hole of like, well, like, but I'm still supporting her. Does this mean that I'm a bad person? Or like does it, the fact that I'm just like, well, I just like don't have that high of expectations like for rich celebrities, like, is that on me? Is that on them? Is it on no one? Like, it's easy to go down that rabbit hole, where really I think the answer is just the ambivalence that this book is.
Like, I don't know. Like it's the answer is partially that it's complicated, but also I just to me, my feeling is very strongly that like the people that I am choosing to have in my daily life, like their values are infinitely more important to me than like like
the music the person who's making the music I listen to.
Yes. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's hard to exist in a society. In conclusion, being alive is exhausting.
I mean, I think if your like worst problem is like, does your artist reflect your values? Like, that's fine. Like, we're good.
It's okay. It's all right.
Yeah.
You're doing okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else you wanted to talk about with this book? Anything else anyone in the chat wanted to talk about with this book?
Yeah, I don't know. I had so many feelings. I liked this one.
Yeah.
I enjoyed this one. This one was good. It was interesting. I
agree. I kind of went in like with, I guess, managed expectations, because I think when I first heard about this book coming out, I was like a little skeptical, just because I wasn't like a 1D person. I wasn't sure like what stance it would end up kind of like I was a little worried, I guess I would be super defensive and go with the hardcore, like internet fangirls are like, I don't know, the savior, kind of like that kind of thing, or just being super like pro. I don't want to say pro, like just like very all in on the idea of like fandom is inherently valuable because it's dominated by women kind of thing. And yeah, so I think seeing it as like experiencing the book as the more ambivalent kind of thing like helped me a lot. There are definitely some things in the books that I was like, oh, I wish this was like expanded on. Like there were things that I wanted to know a little bit more, but it was like a helpful book, especially this week where I felt like constantly called out for my fandom.
It's really interesting to me. I would love to hear more from people who like didn't like this book, because one of the things that I kept thinking too is that like it's one that I would totally recommend this as sort of you're interested in reading about some of this. Like, I don't know, if you have an interest in like fandom literature and stuff, like it feels, just because it's super like accessible. I'm very curious about like the things that people didn't like about it. I guess the hyperfixation on One Direction, I could see that being alienating, but again, I don't think that you can do this effectively otherwise. I don't think that you can make the sort of big picture discussion of like because if you're talking about belonging and then like conspiracy theories, and you're using like different examples for all of them, what's going to end up happening is that like belonging is going to be a trait of one fandom, and like conspiracy theory is going to be like, it doesn't, I don't know. I will say though, of the list of things that she mentions at the back of the book, the very first one, Matt Hills's fan cultures, I highly recommend it. So if you want something that's more, it is like, it's definitely like an academic book. It's not, so it's less readable than this one is what I will say about it. It's got a really interesting section on, it's old enough that it's still like, it deals with the tension around like dispassionate observer versus like I'm in it. and there's a chapter where he talks about essentially like a fandom like autobiography. I forget how exactly what the specific term he uses, but that I thought was really, really interesting. And it was an exercise that Mari and I actually talked about doing on Snark Squad a bunch, and we never actually ended up doing it. I brought it up periodically that I was like, I love this. I love this as a concept.
Yeah. Yeah, we have some feelings. So Colby found the book disappointing, but like the conversation, I would say that Nicole brought a lot to this conversation. I think you like put things in words that I was like, I feel like there needs to be a word for this, and why hasn't someone invented this word? And then you're like, there's a word, like this passionate observer kind of thing, like that you were talking about. Like, yeah, okay, that is super, super helpful. Yeah, I agree with this comment too. Like, I like the way that this was a deep dive. Yeah, and like, so like for me, it helped to have it, like, if it was going to be about fandoms that I don't know, I'd rather be all about one fandom so that I can like kind of build on my knowledge over the course of the book. And I actually felt like the times in this book that I thought were a little bit weaker were the times where she sort of deviated away. Like, especially when she's like she has this one chapter where she's talking about like fans behaving badly, and she's like, I'm not going to talk about all the ways that like 1D fans have been bad. And then it's so hypocritical of me, but then like the next page is entirely Taylor Swift fandom. And so, like, in her like short description of like the 1D fandom doing bad, she's like, well, the journalist's article was kind of bad. Like, and I don't think she means that like they deserve to get doxxed or anything, but there was like a little bit of that like sort of thing that I would have done if I was writing the Taylor Swift version of this book. So like I get it, but it was sort of like, yeah, I wish I would have actually preferred like, and it got redeemed for me because she went all in on the conspiracy theory stuff. So I was like, okay, like we are getting to it, so it's not getting glossed over. But yeah.
But it does, like it reads more effectively. Like that's the thing, is you can build the case about the totality of like a fandom much better. I totally agree that all the places where she was straying from one direction were, to me, the weakest parts of the book. I on the whole enjoyed this kind of all the way through. So like even the things that I would say they were the weaker portions of it. Like I think I struggle a little bit with how she incorporated some of the K-pop stuff for that reason, that where I'm of two minds about it, because like I think that on the one hand, the like 2020 K-pop activism was such a big deal that if you're going to talk about fangirls on the internet post that, I feel like I'm sympathetic to how could you leave that out. But I also feel that on the whole, like the thread she was creating was strongest when it was focused, and like when she was talking about this specific fandom. Because the thing is, like, none of what she is describing, and like this is one of the things that I think makes One Direction such a great entry point for this, is that none of what she is describing is like unique or special. And she talks about that too, that like One Direction is not like there's a lot of just like factors that came together that made them what they were when that, you know, whatever. But like, it's not that she's not saying that like there's something like really unique and special about One Direction that built this fandom. Like that is at no point the case she's making. She's just saying like this is an example of a fandom like being built up around a thing. And I think, and it's, I don't know, it's much more useful to draw like bigger conclusions from that when you're like really focused on describing a specific community throughout. So
yeah, like I think the thing that's special about One Direction is that it grabbed her attention. So it's like what allows her to have like both a kind of more distant, like she'll like be able to step back a little. I wouldn't say distant, but she's able to see like a bigger picture, but she's also able to express a personal relationship to the fandom. And I think that's why one of the other fandoms that she does talk about that was super interesting to me, because I also wasn't expecting it, is the Bruce Springsteen discussion.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know anything about that. And she also still has a personal connection to it through her mom. So she's able to relate to it in a different way that was like very like still like personal for her. And also about what the bigger point of this, like that whole section was.
I tabbed the end of that chapter because I read that last paragraph and immediately burst into tears. She was like, I don't know, she's like talking about like imagining like the way in which I don't know, that was like a really interesting sort of existential like sidebar to me, where she's just sort of talking about like the way in which fandom allowed her to imagine her mother more complexly, and how like, and that like for all of the ways that as a child you think about your parent, but then she's like imagining her mother as a teenager listening to a song, and like what are the things that this music helped her get through, and like I don't know. That's I have a whole like I imported my dad's whole Apple Music library into a Spotify playlist that I listen to a lot as like I don't know, just so just like something about that I just was like so beautiful. Anyway, so cool. I laughed, I cried. You really went on an emotional journey.
Everything with this book.
Great. Also, thank you for my compliments on my mom. I did it.
I'll appreciate Nicole's outfit.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the way it sets off the very colorful nails.
You know, it's the whole vibe. The shirt is too big for me, but it's fine. It's a whole thing. So anyway, well, next month it'll be a minute because we're doing stuff. So our next one is late in the month. Like the third weekend. August 26th.
Yes.
That's the fourth one.
The fourth one.
The end of the month. The last one instead of the first one. But we're gonna read Dangerously. The Subversive Power of Literature in Troubled Times. I don't know. I'm excited about this one. I started reading this one a while ago at the library, and then I think I read I wound up buying it, but I read like a chapter, and she's talking about her dad and her who had it's got like dad grief, and I was like, let's set you aside. This was like last summer, and I was like, I'm not ready for this experience. Perhaps another time, and now I think is that time. So we're just gonna keep doing media about media. Look at us go.
Our favorite thing.
Our favorite thing. We love to do media.
At some point, we're going to finally find a book that's about online book clubs.
Oh, man.
This is just going to be chaos.
When I was grabbing, so I was like, we started late because of me. Unsurprisingly, that's probably usually true. But I grabbed two books. Like, I was like, oh, shit, I had to pick another book. And so I grabbed two books, ran downstairs. I didn't grab it, but in the stack of like little nonfiction books, I almost grabbed another Henry Jenkins book that I bought. It came out post like after I was done, and so that's 2016 maybe. Spreadable Media, Henry Jenkins and Joshua Green, who was also a person I cited in my grad school research, whatever. I didn't grab this book because I wasn't sure if it had an audiobook. And I was like, I got to confirm that there's an audiobook before I suggest it.
That is the requirement.
That's the requirement for me now. But anyway, I did have this brief moment where I was like, I bet that would be another really meta choice to go with this one to also that one. So I don't know. Maybe in a couple months I'll bring that one back around. If there's,
I gotta find a good book that's like about SciComm so that we can just like use this version of the SciComm discussion.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the one.
Yep. Cool. Well, until then, we're gonna read Dangerously.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.